Hey guys, wanted to tell you real quick about our podcast host and sponsor, Anchor.fm. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go out to Anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor.fm. Now back to the show. The Cannabis History Podcast, episode 117.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cannabis History Podcast. This is your host, your long-lost host, Rachel Kennerly. So glad you guys are joining me again. Even despite all of my lackadaisical publishing of late, yeah, it's not my fault. That's what I'm going to go ahead. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Just for some reason, for several months, nobody wanted to talk to me. But I have good news. I've got, let me see, today's podcast, and then like 2 more lined up. So I am hoping and praying, fingers crossed, that there will be another cannabis healing story coming out next Monday. But, you know, the only way that, or the best way for you to know when a new episode comes out is to make sure you go out and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. That way, every time a fresh new episode hits, boom, it's going to automatically download to the podcast app of your choice. While you're out there subscribing, please do me the humongous favor of leaving us a rating or review. And if you've got just, maybe 2 minutes of your time while you're leaving us a rating, go ahead and review it as well, because the reviews are what really help drive the algorithms and push the podcast out to other people who listen to similar type episodes. Now, since the last episode that we had, we've actually had a review come in. And I have a feeling that I may know who the person is that left this review because of their username, but I don't know that I know them. I don't know for sure who it is, but it feels like maybe I should know them, seeing as how their username is fart2/. But their review was great. It said informative and entertaining. The host is a great broadcaster. I really appreciate that, and it boosts my ego, but we all know that I'm not great. I mean, fair to middling, probably, but great, that's a little bit of a stretch. But certainly appreciate the kind words, and I certainly appreciate the shout out and the review, because like I said, it boosts that algorithm and it really puts the word out to other people about the podcast. So if you've got just a couple of minutes, go out and give us a rating review while you're subscribing, particularly that review. It doesn't even have to be that much. You can just say, great podcast, wonderful, love it, more people should listen. Doesn't have to be a whole lot to it. So if you'll go out and do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And you will be lucky, like fart2/, and I will read your review on the air. Today's episode is a little different than what we normally do. Our guest, Robert Carty, is a cannabis activist, and he hasn't always been a cannabis activist. It was actually, he was arrested a couple of years ago on cannabis possession charges for trying to grow, well, he wasn't trying, he was successfully growing cannabis medicine for both he and his wife. Unfortunately, he lives in a state where cannabis as medicine is not legal in Georgia, and he lives in a county who is pretty aggressive in pursuing drug-related charges. So Robert has spent the past couple of years battling the county of Lumpkin, Georgia, and fortunately his case was dismissed because the officer did not follow the proper procedures. So Robert's going to come on and we're going to briefly talk about his use of cannabis as medicine, and the rest of the episode is going to be devoted to discussing his legal travails and just complaining about the, quote, justice system as a whole. It's far from anything resembling justice at this point. Putting people in cages over plants is not justice. So without further delay, let's welcome Robert to the program. Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Absolutely. You had reached out to me. It's been almost a year ago. I was looking back at our Facebook messages, and it's been almost a year ago since you reached out to me and said, hey, I have a story I want to tell, but I'm in a little bit of legal trouble, so we may have to wait till that's resolved. And so I'm happy to hear that it sounds like your legal troubles have been resolved, and so as a result, here you are with us today.
Yeah, it allows me to speak a little bit more unfiltered. Originally, when we talked, I was going to I wanted to come on the program with my attorney, so that way they could sort of temper anything that I could say that might hurt my case. But in that period of time, luckily, we just resolved our case after more than a year on appeal with the Georgia State Court of Appeals. The appellate court held up the decision from the Superior Court judge, and the charges were finally released on myself and my wife. We were released of the charges about 4 weeks ago now.
Oh, wow. Well, that's pretty exciting. And it's surprising because of all this COVID stuff. A lot of court stuff has just been like completely put on hold. So I guess the appeals court was still working during this process?
Yeah, most of the local superior courts were actually, we've had a judicial emergency. I'm in Georgia, and it's been postponed. I think this is the fifth or sixth time now. But luckily, the Court of Appeals, because most of that's not done in an open courtroom, most of it's judges and their clerks and their offices and stuff like this that are reading the information. Luckily, the Court of Appeals stayed functioning during the entire process. If not, I'd essentially still be on house arrest and awaiting a decision. The appellate process here in Georgia took me a little over 11 months. It was just a couple of weeks short of a year.
Wow. Well, I guess let's kind of go back in time, and before we get to your legal troubles, just tell us, because you have a medical cannabis story, so just tell us a little bit about, what brought you to cannabis, I guess.
Well, originally, I smoked a little marijuana back when I was in high school and stuff like that, and sampled it a couple times when I was overseas in the service, but it wasn't really a part of my life. And I was more of a drinker. I'm a retired businessman and movie producer, and it was part of being at the country club, having alcohol, stuff like that, something I didn't really think of. But I met a wonderful lady about 25 years ago, and I was living in California, and she had problems with panic attacks, and also later ended up having perimenopause problems. That the marijuana it was incredible. We couldn't find any type of solution for it. And she actually had her local physician in California, which is a little bit in front of the curve medically than most of the country, said, hey, we've tried all these other things. Why don't you have you tried cannabis? And she tried it, and it worked out great for her. And then she started other problems that she would have, anything from a stomach ache to headache. She found certain types wouldn't work for her, certain types would. And I looked at it. Wow, hold on. If she has to have this kind for her panic attack, and she has to have this kind for her menopause, and she has to have this kind for her stomach ache, and doesn't want the other, it's got to be credible. So it made me start taking notice. And as the medical cannabis got a little bit more open in California and people would talk about it, it was fine. Well, I had somebody with the dispensary said, well, you should try this, because I had serious problems with inflammation. Mm-hmm. And it was suggested a couple of different breeds. The first one I tried didn't work. The second breed I tried, literally within seconds of taking a hit, my intestines started hurting, my knees quit hurting, and it was amazing. And so I've been using cannabis myself, with the exception of the last 2 years when I was prevented by the state for about 10 years for various medical conditions.
Yeah. What was your attitude towards cannabis? I mean, I know you used it kind of just for fun every now and then. What was your overall attitude towards cannabis? It sounds like you were probably pretty skeptical that it was going to work there's no medicinal benefit according to the government.
Well, I'm a libertarian, so I've always believed anybody should be able to put anything in their body that they like to. So, as an overall philosophy, I never had any problem with it. But, being a businessman, I owned a chain of surgical centers for a long time, and then I got into producing movies, documentaries, and television programming. And it was something that I just thought was best. I personally kept it secret. I wasn't a person. I smoked for medical reasons only. There was probably 3 or 4 people in the world that knew I'd been consuming cannabis for over 10 years. They had no idea. And I didn't smoke it with people at parties. And because I didn't know where to pick it up for my wife and she needed certain breeds, I started cultivating personally for both of our uses just because I wanted to keep it secret. So unfortunately, I wasn't very active until this happened. For the simple reason that, it's my business and, certain people look at you in a prejudiced manner if they find out you consume cannabis. They think you're lazy. They think you're unintelligent. There's certain stereotypes that go along with it. And just for personal reasons, I felt it best to try to keep it, on the down low.
Now, when did y'all move to Georgia? Because the laws related to cannabis are way different in California than they are in Georgia.
We came here in 2005, so we've been here 15 years now.
Yeah, so at that point, you really had no choice but to grow it yourself because you can't find reliable quality product in a state where it's not legal.
Well, when we first came here, all they had is something that they called mids, which was, in California, they called it Mexican swagweed. You can't sell it. And it didn't really do anything for either me or my wife medically. Yeah. It gave you a buzz and a headache, but other than that, it wasn't anything that served any purpose for us. So to be able to continue to get it, I had the types that we needed medically. I had to grow it. I didn't really have a choice. So at that point, I set up a little room in the home and got a hold of this type of seeds that we need and started growing 12 different varieties for me and my wife.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how everything went down as far as your arrest. Did they do like they did with Sharon and kick your door in the middle of the night, or what was the process for that?
Well, when they first showed up, my wife was out walking the dog, and she was approached by by 2 gentlemen in a big white Suburban, and said that there was information about us. Where they had several reports of narcotic sales, which sort of struck her strange, and they hadn't interacted with me at the time because nobody really. My wife had maybe 4 or 5 friends that knew she smoked weed. Most of them didn't live in Georgia. Maybe 1 or 2 of them lived in Georgia. Nobody knew we grew, and so it was a really strange event trying to figure out what happened. They requested access to the home voluntarily. At that point, she brought me out, and I had interchanges with them, and I denied giving away my Fourth Amendment rights and allowing to search wholesale through the home. And at that point, he picked up his radio and said, okay, we'll do this the effing hard way, and got on his radio. And within seconds, there was anywhere from 20 to 30 different officers that came speeding down the driveway, including SWAT teams and everything you can imagine.
Wow. So, I mean, y'all live in the boonies. So what was their probable cause for trying to get into your house, to get a warrant to get in the house?
Well, they didn't have any probable cause, which is the reason the case was dispensed of.
Yeah.
The officer went and applied for an affidavit for search warrant without confirming. He was given evidence by a girl in my room. Of course, it has to be air conditioned. And the person that put the air conditioning systems in, wife, who was, if you can believe this, we found it was under investigation for the murder of her own son with methadone, gave them some information that was incorrect, and the officer lied and exaggerated greatly on top of it.
Oh,
and
wow.
Literally, we were hermits, and I only made about 3 or 4 phone calls a month. I never had visitors, so they didn't bother to talk to our neighbors, anything like that. And they had basically the last section of the search warrant said they expected to find a multitude of people on the premises processing, manufacturing, distribution, and distributing illegal narcotics is what they told the judge. And literally, the whole process was said and done. They couldn't even find anybody that knew I smoked weed.
Wow.
The officer essentially invented what he needed to violate my Fourth Amendment and get access to my property based on the claims of a methadone addict that had serious problems with the law. That literally, we had not seen this person in 3 years, 10 and a half months.
Wow. So almost 4 months after they put the AC system in, this lady who's accused of murder is like, I mean, was that like a plea bargain on her part? Just throwing something to the wall to see if it would stick?
Well, we still don't know. We know who it is, but they haven't formally released the name. And in the affidavit for search warrant, it said that she didn't receive anything personally, but we don't know. They might have given her something for for a family member or whatever. We're still in a discovery process for a potential 1983 federal civil rights lawsuit, trying to find out the information on it. So we're doing open records request and trying to get a hold of some more of the discovery that was used.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. So this completely came out of the blue for you guys. So it's not like they were doing some sort of weirdo stakeout or anything.
Well, no, he said that he couldn't do a stakeout. He couldn't do surveillance, which is crazy. My front yard is essentially the size of 3 football fields. That's completely cut grass all the way to the street. He was just too lazy to do it. So it's easier to just lie and tell the judge you can't, which is sort of funny because the next 8 months after we were released from jail, they had us under constant surveillance on a property that supposedly couldn't be surveilled.
Wow.
But it's typical of what law enforcement does in these rural communities.
Yeah. So now you hired Catherine Bernard as your lawyer, who is a patron saint, in my opinion.
Oh,
so
she's a superhero.
Yeah. So how did you find out about her? I mean, I guess her reputation probably precedes her throughout the state at the minimum.
Well, I had never heard of her, which was sort of interesting. I was on the verge of hiring another attorney that came to me recommended. And I'm sitting in jail. They kept me there 36 days before I was allowed to have a bond hearing.
Wow. How is that legal?
You're supposed to receive a bond hearing within 30 days, but unfortunately the people responsible for charging them for violating your rights are the same people violating your rights. So
right.
It's never going to be enforced. So they tried to postpone it another 6 to 8 weeks. They literally wanted me to sit in jail for 4 to 5 months on a marijuana charge. And I have no criminal background, no criminal history at all. Saying that I was a threat to the community and a threat to their confidential informant, just making up basically anything that they could. And I was sitting in jail. I'd been there for about 2 weeks, was getting ready to hire somebody else, and they said, your attorney's here, and it's about between 11 and 11:30 at night. And I was like, that's strange. So I get up out of my cell and stuff, and they take me down and open the door, and I see 2 younger folks in there, about 20 years younger than me. And Catherine's a very beautiful little blonde girl, and she's got a handsome guy dressed in a nice expensive suit with her, and they both look like lawyers to me. I mean, Catherine, you've seen her, she dressed impeccably.
Oh, yeah, to the nines. She always looks so well put together. Like the perfect Southern lady.
Yeah, I had no idea who these people were, though. And both of them were wearing Republican pins on their lapel. I was like, wow, that's sort of interesting. Because, you think of, people that are active in trying to reform marijuana prohibition. You don't see a lot of card-carrying Republicans in that group for political reasons.
Nope, not in Georgia for sure.
Well, what had ended up happening with her is a couple of the cops approached her. She had just won a big case in Lawrence County where she got a gentleman off for doing some home cultivation, and she got that case. She won that case in a jury through jury nullification.
Yes, I've seen that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and this was just luckily it was a week or so after that, and a couple of the cops had heard about her case, started talking to her about it, and I'm not a fan of a lot of what police officers do, but there was two sheriff's deputies that cornered her and said, look, there's this guy, Rob Carty, in here. He's a vet. He's the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. And the DA and a couple of investigators are essentially trying to screw him, and you need to look at this case. So she was actually, I discovered her through 2 sheriff's deputies that recruited her and got her to call me out of my cell in the middle of the night. And it was one of the best things that could have happened to me in the case.
That's awesome, man. For somebody in law enforcement to say, hey, you really need to look at this case. That's pretty incredible. What all were they trying to pin on you? Because I know they try to layer on more and more charges usually so that they can get you to cop to a plea deal and still get their little win.
Oh yeah, and the officer admitted this in the motion to suppress hearing under questioning from Catherine that even after a 5-hour search with 30 people and going through every bank account for decades and tax returns for 20-some years, they could find no evidence of any type of sales that ever having occurred, yet they charged me with trafficking, they charged me with possession with intent to sell, and they charged me with possessions of firearms during the commission of a felony.
Yeah, that... As if people in Georgia don't own firearms, which has nothing to do, just the fact that they were on your premises doesn't mean that they're involved in the cannabis side of anything.
Well, I've got a really large home, and actually some of the lawyers and stuff and I because they went through in the indictment and said I had a Ruger M77 with an arm's reach of marijuana, but of course when they do discovery, they take pictures of where everything is located. And even though they said that, the actual grow room was downstairs. I got about a 20,000 square foot house. Mm-hmm. And the closest weapon to the marijuana was 141 feet away, was through like 7 doorways requiring, on a different floor and requiring like 19 90-degree direction changes to get to.
Oh, wow.
And so none of the weapons were even close to any of the marijuana. So it was... But then they tried, of course, through civil asset forfeiture, they tried to steal all of those weapons. And we're still in the process, even more than a month after the case was dropped, we're still in the process of trying to get back my personal possessions that the court found were illegally seized.
Wow. And I mean, that's the thing with civil asset forfeiture. You don't even have to be accused of a crime, and they can still take your stuff. In this case, you were, but...
Well, they get real bad up here because what they do is, they try to keep me in jail for a long period of time, and they thought they were going to keep me in longer, so they were a little slower than normal. But typically, they'll file a civil asset forfeiture suit against you when you're sitting in jail, and of course, you don't have a phone book. You can't even find a criminal attorney while you're sitting in Lumpkin County Jail, much less be able to go out and defend yourself civilly. Mm-hmm. And from the minute they serve you, you have 30 days to respond to that civil lawsuit, or you automatically forfeit everything.
Oh,
and
wow.
People are sitting in jail, don't have the ability to attend the civil, don't have the ability to answer the civil complaint themselves, and don't have the ability to hire an attorney or even contact an attorney. And by the time they get out on bond, all of their stuff has legally, with air quotes, been taken away from them. And it's just part of the scam that's used, that they use to fund not only the sheriff's department, but they use it to fund various forms of government in the area.
So while you're sitting in jail and they're dragging your feet to get you to a bond hearing, they're putting this stuff, running this stuff, and within 30 days they can just take it. Because you can't even defend yourself, let alone defend your property.
Yeah, if you don't respond within 30 days, you basically haven't answered the complaint, and the judge can rule from the bench that you essentially haven't satisfied the civil law and didn't answer the complaint, and they can just rule against you, and typically it's what they do.
Mm. Now, what's going on with your wife during all this? Is she sitting in jail too?
Yeah, they didn't violate her rights. They let her have a bond hearing on the 30th day, exactly, and granted her. And then, again, she's not a violent person. She had a minor drug arrest when she was 19 years old. And we're both well into our 50s. Mm-hmm. So this is all they claim. Even though she turned herself in the following day, they claimed she was a flight risk and kept her in the maximum amount of days. Because, of course, the longer they can let you sit in jail, the more inclined you are to take a plea to be let out of jail.
Yeah.
And it's part that they don't want to have to defend the cases. They want to do what they want to do. That's why we have over a 97% plea bargain rate in our area.
Wow.
And so they don't take cases to court, and they have basically a program. The officers in jail, some of the COs were very nice people, and they were telling me it's so bad that they even have a name for it. It's called the Lumpkin County Okie Doke, and it's sort of scary that this process that the police and that the district attorney put you through is done so frequently they've given it a name.
That's horrific. And, I mean, I'm sure Lumpkin County is not the only place that happens in.
No, through my research and stuff, I've spent a couple of years researching this and going what goes on and everything. And it's something that's very common in most rural areas in the United States where the state has not made marijuana legal. And it's a scary situation. I mean, people that have never harmed anybody. We've got a gentleman just right down the road here from me that's a 71-year-old retired doctor that was going to make his own CBD oil because, the CBD market was slightly opened up in Georgia, but it's impossible to get anything quality. And this guy had 6 plants, and he's being threatened with like 35 years in prison at 71 years old.
That's horrible.
And I'm so tired of it. We're not, they threaten me with 55 to 75 years on my offenses, and I'm 55 years old. You might as well give me 1,000 years because it's not going to matter. And you get a grumpy old veteran like this, like myself, or like some of the people, they're having a lot harder time with some of the older people that they're trying to persecute than they do with the young. If you're 19 years old and they threaten you with 75 years in jail, it's real scary. If you're a little bit sickly because they've kept you from smoking your medicine for 2 years, like me, and you threaten me with 75 years, I really don't care. It's the same as threatening me with 1,000. It doesn't have any type of effect in my decision making.
Yeah. Well, and you're probably also, a 19-year-old kid versus someone in their 50s, you've got a financial disparity too, and the 19-year-old is like, I can't afford to hire a good lawyer to get me out of this. I've got to take a plea deal because I need to get out and get to work.
Yeah, and typically they're given a public defender, who essentially all public defenders do nowadays is negotiate pleas, in a lot of cases very poor pleas.
Yeah.
Clients, and that's the reasons I've really became an advocate and getting into working with cannabis is some of the stuff that I've seen. We're trying to change the laws because what they're doing to the young folks it's ridiculous, especially here in Georgia. 55% of all prisoners in our state are in state not for the crime that they committed, but for either probation or a parole offense.
Oh, wow.
And so what they do is they throw out these plea bargains to these young kids, and then anything that happens in Georgia, once you take a plea bargain and you're on either parole or probation, you get put into a situation where for any reason, just a claim by law enforcement or your probation officer that you violated, you now get to go in front of a judge, and now you've lost all your rights to a jury trial.
Wow.
And essentially some guy who is sitting on the bench that, may be heavy-duty right-wing and, may be prejudiced, just throws these people in prison without even really a trial. All they do is a probation hearing, and they're off. And that's how we populate a lot of the private prisons in the state of Georgia. And it's scary that this is being done. We're ruining young people's lives for essentially a little bit of profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't even have the words to say. It's so frustrating because they've forfeited the lives of all these. I mean, in addition to all the consequences when you have a felony on your record related to illegal activity, and then they've got this, hammer that they hold over your head, and they can drop it on you at any moment for any reason and send you to jail over what was nothing, a joint.
Yeah, it's a streets to prison pipeline, and it's just real scary. It doesn't do anything good. We have the University of North Georgia is in our little town up here, and has about 19,000 students, or at least did before COVID, and they make dozens and dozens of arrests every year of people, they're working hard trying to get their BA. They might go to a party, they get pulled over, some cop smells weed, they find a joint in their car, and now all of a sudden, you've turned that whole kid's life around. Mm-hmm. They keep them locked up in the system here to the point where these poor kids, for a little bit of marijuana, are now taking plea bargains for 3 years probation. It's a program that's meant to make the person fail. And then that person ends up doing a little bit of time either in jail or in prison before they end up getting off. And they've got a record. And you had somebody that was, was going to college, had a good chance of getting a an engineering degree or a business degree, and now all of a sudden they have a police record and they're working at the chicken plant for the rest of their life. And it's something that I see in hundreds of kids in the area, and it's sad and it's scary.
Yeah. And the people that say that this is for the children, it's like they don't recognize the irony in what they're saying. It's like, well, we're going to protect you by putting you in jail.
Well, I promise you, putting somebody in jail has killed way, way, way more children than marijuana ever has in the 10,000 years it's been around and being consumed.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, especially if you're like in prison versus like the county jail. I mean, exactly. The county jail is probably bad enough, but going up to the big house, it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, actually, the jails here are so bad that a lot of the people that I was in that were facing longer sentences were literally begging to be able to be shipped off to the state prison.
Oh, wow.
The food and stuff like that from commissary is less than a quarter. They don't, they don't rake you across the coals to make phone calls. You have, in 36 days that I was there, they didn't have a working stove, and we were never allowed outside for even 1 second, much less the mandated hour that you're supposed to get as a minimum. But they don't care. Their response is, oh, well, the oven's broken. What do you want us to do about it? Well, sorry, we don't have enough deputies right now, so you're not allowed out in a caged yard.
Where are we going to go? There's razor wire on the top.
Yeah, and it's a small area. I mean, you could fit maybe 30 people into their little yard there at the most, and it would be crammed. And it's not about what it's about control. They're trying to make you as uncomfortable as possible to try and induce a plea. So in a lot of cases, some of the jails have gotten they may not be as dangerous as far as the violence, but as far as being comfortable. And being able to live a semblance of a normal life, prison is much better. These local jails, we weren't allowed no newspapers, no news. You have no idea what's going on in the world. The only thing they have is a small library where 90% of the books have missing pages out of them. They let you out into a common area in a cell block for about anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half a couple of times a day. But the programming they have on the one television, typically they think it's funny to put on USA movies that are 3 hours long. So, you're the idea of literally the only entertainment you have there is to watch an hour of a 3-hour movie with jammed with commercials. So nobody watches any TV there. People think that, that criminals are living the life of luxury. There's no workout room. There's no yard time. Literally, the food is probably, we called it cat food. You couldn't even tell what it was. It was some of the most, and I was in the military, and I'm an old time.
That's pretty bad.
I ate sea rations. Sea rations looked like a gourmet meal compared to what was served there. And essentially, it's all part of the plan. The sheriffs use it to save money on the budget because here, for instance, the food budget, the sheriff gets to keep the overages on personally. And
oh my gosh!
It's miserable as you can make it. So he has a personal financial incentive, but then they also have the incentive that if they keep you in jail, you'll take a 5-year plea bargain deal for probation just to get out if they've kept you in there. And there were some people that had been. When I was in there, there was one gentleman specifically. He was a large guy. He had lost already 180 pounds.
Oh, my gosh.
And had been there almost 10 months. And it was for a yard that he was in, and they found a bulb for a house, like a light bulb, but it was like an old-fashioned antique type bulb that looked like it may have been used for consuming meth, and they kept him there 10 months, and they were still yet to actually check the light bulb for methamphetamine residue after all. Oh my
gosh.
And he eventually, I tried to keep in touch with him. I helped teach a GED program that I got him involved in, and they made me the assistant instructor, and then I brought him on. He was a good kid, and so I kept up with him to some extent, and he did get out, and on his only charge was possession of drug-related paraphernalia, and he took 3 years on probation.
Just to get out of that hellhole.
Yeah. It's sad that we're doing it to our own citizens.
Man. Well, your case got thrown out. What were some of the findings as to why they threw it out?
They found that the officer attempted to put down information that was incorrect and lies in his affidavit for search warrant, and essentially misled the magistrate judge that signed the warrant, and that there was just too much stuff in there that was untrue. That he didn't attempt to corroborate anything in the case. They tell you about how long these investigations and stuff are done. He had spent a total, if you take away the amount of time it took him to type up his search warrant, his entire investigation came down. He drove by our house once, which he had to enter the property to find out who, but I won't get too much into the weeds with it. But so we know that he trespassed, but somehow on trash day, he went by and did a pull, and there was 41 Walmart bags that had marijuana residue on it, which is a complete joke. It was stuff that was obviously planted. You can fit thousands and thousands of plant and leaf matter into that many bags. Mm-hmm. And so he did a trash pull, and then all he did at that point was went in front of a judge to violate our Fourth Amendment rights over search and seizure. So
in the trash pull, that was a violation of your rights as well, right? He's supposed to have a warrant for that, right?
No, it's considered in Georgia abandoned at the curb.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I live on a pretty large estate, so literally while my trash can sat out in the curb for 18 hours before they came, my trash can was closer to 6 different homes than it was to my own home, and sitting on a busy street that has a military base at the end of it. And I don't think some passerby threw the stuff in there. I think that this officer, he believed in his mind maybe what his confidential informant said and wanted to try to get the warrant. So he planted a little evidence in the garbage can and used it as an excuse to rifle through our personal possessions with about 30 other people for 5 hours.
Wow. What does that look like? I mean, y'all were gone for 30 days. I'm assuming that you were not there whenever they finished their investigations. What does your house look like after they get through doing all that?
Well, they broke all kinds of stuff, and they didn't even do property receipts for the stuff they took. They didn't even do an inventory until 4 or 5 days afterward. They're supposed to give you the property receipts in, but I was the only one that went to jail. I told them my wife didn't know anything about it, and my wife, she knew that I did something, and she knew I smoked. But my room, it wasn't like I had a little hatch door, and I built a completely concealed and hermetically sealed room. You couldn't smell it anywhere in the house. My wife didn't know where it was. I would grow enough marijuana to last us for about 2 years, and that would take me about 7 months. And then when I got down to about a pound and a half, I knew it was time to start growing again. And I just wanted a room I could completely lock up and close off when it wasn't in use. I didn't want to have to disassemble it. And we've got 12 bedrooms. We have guests and stuff all the time. And when I had people around my house, I didn't want to have to explain it. I didn't want anybody to know. And so the room and everything was kept completely quiet. And they didn't arrest my wife. I was hoping that they weren't. And I'm in handcuffs, and they told her, well, you're going to be arrested too. You can turn yourself in tomorrow by 1 o'clock. So they left her at the house, but it was a shamble. They broke a $60,000 chandelier.
My gosh.
The T-bar ceiling, so they could check up in the roof through drop-down ceiling. They stood on a old slot machine that I have from the defunct Tropicana, and they stood on the glass top for it to stick their head up through the ceiling. Big boot print and a piece of custom-made hand-painted glass, and just... They had, some of the officers had respect for what they were doing in the search, and some of them, it seemed like they were actually trying to break things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going out of their way to do it. Now, this officer that got the affidavit or the search warrant, is there any way to if he's lied consistently through this process, is there any way to Brady bill him?
Well, with the Brady Act is all the problems that we're having with getting the officers Brady list. I think they've only received lists from about half of the jurisdictions in the United States. But we're actually looking at filing a civil rights lawsuit for the violation of our civil rights when he did all this. But unfortunately, the way that the laws are written, unless there's been a case that's exactly identical that already has a precedent, they refuse to make a decision that would actually set precedent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some stuff we're trying to overcome right now to be able to hold him accountable for the actions that he did. And it didn't just stop there. It continued on for with surveillance with Catherine, who he approached her during our calendar call visit and told her that he would give her discovery if he didn't have to testify in the initial in the pleadings when we went into plead. And so we agreed on that, and he pulled the information. He went to hand her the discovery he had at that point and pulled it out of her hand and said, no, I need to go check make sure that the confidential informant's name's not in there because I don't want your client killing her.
Oh, my gosh.
Actually even tried to, turn my counsel against me. And luckily, Catherine and I had already had a lot of in-depth conversations. And she's like, Mr. Carty's one of the nicest clients I've ever had. You can't really think that. Well, he said his exact words were, maybe he won't, but he might have one of his people do it for him. And my people, somebody couldn't even find one person that knew I smoked marijuana that had ever smoked with me. So, and they try every tactic in the world. It's just, it's incredible. And it's all basically to get you to take a plea, because that's what I warn everybody out there. If you're not guilty or if you think the law's wrong, look for jury nullification and don't take a plea. Because when you take a plea, all it's doing is encouraging them to do this for other people. If I would have either allowed them into my home to look voluntary without demanding a warrant, I wouldn't have had the right to the motion to suppress hearing, and so I'd still be under looking to go to trial under multitude of charges. But one of the main things is that if you take a plea, you've now said you're guilty. So now you have no rights to even attempt to hold the officer who did all the wrong responsible. And all that does is, just like any other criminal, the more times you get away with something, the more you think you can get away with. And if they can get away with it with you, they get away with it they're going to pull the same tactic on everybody they have any type of interaction with. And, at a certain point, somebody's got to stand up and take a stand just for society, because what they're doing to our brothers and sisters out there is just wrong.
Yeah, because then they get rewarded for doing this. Oh, you got this drug bust. You brought down this kingpin that was selling drugs in our fair county.
Well, all this stuff.
Pat on the back.
Yeah, the motion to suppress. They said there was no evidence of sales, there was no money, blah, 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 go through all of this type of stuff. Yet the story that they told the papers, this story that they promoted it so much that it was on ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox in Atlanta, and was covered in 55 different papers. They weighed my wet dirt that I just watered more than an hour before, and for a small room that's the lit area is actually under 1% of the total square footage of my house, they claimed it was a huge grow house. They weighed my dirt, said that there was 58.5 pounds of marijuana by weighing wet soil. And
oh my gosh.
There was 3 pounds of finished product. I usually needed about 6 pounds to last me for 2 years. And so at any point, the most finished marijuana there would ever been at 6 pounds. And even if you counted the trim and leaf, it would have been maybe 7.5. And somehow they turned that into 58 pounds. My gun collection, I'm a former federal firearms licensed dealer that had gun stores. So all my guns are legal. They had 4473s. Now, they tried to make it sound in the articles like I was some kind of illegal weapons trafficker. And it's literally incredible. And if they can do it, what scared me, if they can do it to me, what they'll do to everybody else. Because, I was a relatively well-known, not only documentarian, but a conservative documentarian. I used to appear regularly on the O'Reilly Factor when it was the #1 show in the country. I've been everything from Geraldo to Dayside and done thousands of phone interviews and stuff in my life. So this is a Republican area. I was a well-known Republican, liked by people that had never been any kind of problems. And it doesn't matter. Once they go out on a limb, they're willing to take anybody to the cleaners, and they're willing to lie. They're willing to say whatever they need to get you to take a plea, because the minute you take a plea, all of their problems go away.
Yeah. Yeah, and, imagine if you'd been somebody without the resources that you have and the reputation that you have. they'd just run you through the ringer and nobody would be the wiser.
Yeah, they'll issue you a public defender that'll refuse to try your case, tell you, look, you need to take this deal. It's a great deal. It's a great deal. And they run roughshod over people. And they're ruining people's lives for a crime that has no victim. It shouldn't even be a crime. It just should be called rule breaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're the lawbreakers, not you.
In my opinion,
they can't even follow their own rules, and then they're going to come and bust in your door for nothing. Or
in our affidavit for search warrant, there was either I think last time we went through and counted, there was like 79 different claims that he were either greatly exaggerated, completely false and erroneous, or stuff that was just absolutely made up. And all they're looking for is the bust. And the departments don't even police their own. This was somebody that had been in law enforcement for like 16 and a half, 17 years. But he had worked at the jail the whole time, and somehow just a couple of months before got made head narcotics investigator. And what was funny is he completed his training on marijuana grow operations between the time he got the 5 days where he got contacted by the confidential informant and the 5 days where he served the search warrant and arrested us.
Wow.
And those 5 days contained a weekend and the 4th of July holiday. So actually there was only 1.5 work days in there.
Right.
Had no experience. We don't believe he had ever filled out an affidavit for search warrant before. And somehow for a fairly decent-sized county, I mean, he somehow got made head narcotics investigator and able to go in front of a magistrate court judge to come in and violate your civil rights in the Fourth Amendment to go through your home based on his words. And he hadn't been trained. He had not received any oversight. He had not shown his affidavit to the sheriff, to the assistant sheriff, to a DA, nothing. And that's all it takes, essentially, is to ruin your life. One officer that doesn't want to do work and just wants to try to take a shortcut, thinks he knows what he doesn't know. And it's at a certain point when you've never been involved, I've never been arrested before. So I kept thinking this whole time for months that, certainly eventually some boss is going to look at this, a DA, a prosecutor, no matter who looked at it, every time there was another person involved, all they did was turn up the heat. And at first I was like, eventually somebody's going to look at this and go, hey, this is two old people growing medicine for themselves. 75 years in jail is sort of unreasonable, and let's adjust the charges and this type of stuff. And they didn't do it. And at a certain point I got upset because they didn't do it and decided I don't care if they offered me jaywalking. I wasn't going to take a plea.
Yeah, at what point does this become cruel and unusual punishment? 75 years over a plant? Really?
Yeah, for a 55-year-old. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's a death sentence for most people.
I want to live as long as I can, but I really doubt I'm going to make 130. So.
Well, let me ask you this. So you're involved in this process for 2 years, and during that period of time, you can't have access to your medicine because I'm assuming they're watching you like hawks and maybe making you do drug tests.
Well, they never tested me with for drugs the entire time, but we were under surveillance. So if they would have seen anything, out of the 2 years, they surveyed us for about the first 8 months. And then something weird happened on the case we're still trying to find out, because all surveillance stopped. The cop that arrested me all of a sudden leaves the force, goes and joins the fire department in another county at almost 40 years old. Now he's just 2.5 years short of his retirement. And the prosecutor that was prosecuting my case quits and moves to another county at the same time. And in conjunction with that, all surveillance stopped. They still kept trying to play hardball as far as the prosecution and stuff.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask you if the guy was still on the force, but...
He is. They brought him in. After he fired, they brought him in as a part-time person. So that way he can continue sucking off the government teat for his retirement. They'll keep him on part-time for the last 2 years that he needs to essentially get his taxpayer-paid retirement medical for the rest of his life. And And he's got a career as the oldest fireman I've ever seen. I've got several relatives that are on fire that are my brother-in-law Monty is the real famous police chief in Columbine, Colorado, that went in that the police wouldn't go in, and he went in solo and saved several kids' lives. And so I've got a lot of friends and family in law enforcement, and in the fire department. They said they've never heard of somebody 38 years old coming onto a force. They typically, when all the chiefs that I know do hire, they look for somebody that's 20, 21, because they'd like to get a good 20, 25 years of work out of somebody that they've put into that much training. So it was obviously something that was done as a favor to the local sheriff. He called his buddy in a neighboring county and got him on the fire department to help protect them. And that's what they do, as opposed to punishing these people and getting rid of the bad apples. They just perpetuate, and everybody's upset about the violence. And sure, there's 1,000 people that are killed by police officers in the United States every year, a little over on average. But literally, the process that I went through is done to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans every day. And that's the real rampant abuse that you see in law enforcement, even more so than the beatings and the murders, the lies that they tell and the process that they put people through that have never harmed a person in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Golly, it's just absurd. So what was your health like during this period of time when you didn't have access to your medicine?
Oh, I noticed I hadn't been to the doctor in, I'll bet it was 15, 16 years. I actually started developing problems while I was still in jail. And they put me on multiple medications while I was in jail, and the inflammation that I was receiving, my stomach bloated up, my chest bloated up. They had me on 3 different types of medications, took all kinds of samples, which they took. They never got back to me on them. They didn't know what went on. So the jail the nurses in the jail and the doctor that was supposed to be evaluating my stuff that I never met didn't know anything. Luckily, I got out and could start doing treatment. But now, as opposed to being able to smoke a little marijuana, I'm constantly having to get steroid injections and non-steroidal inflammatories. I fought for many years, and I've had a lot of bone fractures. So I've got bad arthritis in a lot of areas, and then they think I have is Crohn's disease. So I have a lot of inflammation in the gut. And marijuana works 10 times better if you use the right breed than any either steroidal or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory that's on the market. I mean, there's nothing that's even close. And I've tried everything from prednisone, injectables, everything out there. And at this point, because I want to be an advocate, I'm still not consuming. So I actually just went to the emergency room on Tuesday of this week, and my blood pressure was 238 over, I think it was 130, and my body temperature was down to 96 degrees, and they literally thought I was going to stroke out. And it was all caused by the pain and the inflammation. My stomach size in like 12 hours had gone up. A pair of pants I was wearing the day before, I couldn't come within 5 inches of being able to fasten.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
And it's something that, I could, my problem is I could take a couple of bong hits and I'd be inclined to do so. I'm trying to stay away from the advocacy, but because I was never involved in sales, I don't know anybody to buy drugs from.
Yeah.
Sort of unsafe for me to start walking around a small town going, hey, can anybody get me some of, I need something that's predominantly sativa, no more than 20% indica, because that has a tendency to what works best for my inflammation. And I might have to try 4 or 5 breeds before I find one that works real well for me. Unfortunately, all 12 breeds that I had established over 25 years of growing for myself and my wife were destroyed by the police officer, and a lot of them were exclusive seeds given to me out in California by Jack Hare, who's now passed away. So
wow.
He killed at least 12 individual genetic lines that were made for medicine. The police destroyed, and neither us or anybody else will ever see the benefit off those breeds ever again.
Wow. Gosh, that's worse than all the other stuff you've lost. You've lost access to your medicine, which you knew worked, and now you've got to start all over again.
My wife was a real part. I try to be a tough guy, and I don't complain about the pain and stuff too much. I go about my business, and my wife is to me, is the more debilitating part. She has panic attacks that are horrible. And
and I'm sure being in jail helped that, didn't it?
Oh, no, she had several that were there and had to have treatment. But with her, we found a couple of breeds that literally, by the time she gets halfway done with her bong hit, panic attack is gone. And she has these panic attacks where literally it's not what you invented. You envision with a panic attack. I had never been around anybody that had one before. And that's the reason we originally started on it, is she would not be able to move. She would be curled up in a ball, shaking and crying and not even hardly being able to talk for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And the first time I saw it, I thought she was going to die. I mean, you don't know what to do in that type of situation. And we had a physician that requested that she try some cannabis, and it helped a little bit. And she eventually found a couple of different breeds that she could smoke it. And I mean, she right as one was starting to come on, she'd take it, they'd go away, and 2 minutes later she was fine. But I guess, people would rather see a little 4 foot, 10 inch, 90-pound girl suffer than give her the plant the plant that heals her.
Yeah. Well, it's as bad as it is. I'm really glad that you got a good attorney and that you didn't say, "Oh yeah, come on in," and waived your rights. I mean, so I'm glad that things have worked out. I hate that it had to go the way that it did for y'all. That's just terrible that you even had to go through that.
The best advice you could ever get here in Georgia is don't talk to police, period. And if you get into trouble, call Catherine Bernard.
Yeah, I think those are excellent words of wisdom for sure. Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time and appreciate you sharing your story. And I hope people will take to heart, maybe the takeaway from what they've heard today is that they will not waive their rights and that they won't take a plea deal. If you're not guilty, don't take a plea deal because there are ramifications long after you sign that piece of paper.
Yeah, a lot of people end up in jail years and years just because they get put on a year probation that they can never get off on because of little small mistakes or in a lot of cases evidence that was created. The best thing people can do besides not taking a plea is make sure you don't vote for politicians unless they support the repeal of prohibition, because it's ridiculous. And it's getting to the point now where, in our local community, we probably have a dozen senior citizens under indictment, and people are starting to realize, hey, my granny doesn't need to go to jail because her arthritis hurts her or because she needs it for her glaucoma. And they're perpetuating. They started off, it was originally race-based, but now it's just become, I don't think that a race even plays an issue anymore. It's something that's controlled by finances. It gives you the ability to steal stuff through asset forfeiture and get bails and fines and fees and money for private probation offices, and it's become strictly a financial matter, and it's sad. We don't need to make money off abusing our citizens.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing is that when times are tough, which they are right now because governments are all short on cash, well, when times are tough, they turn the screws up on the very people who can't afford to lose any more of their income to the government. Civil asset forfeiture always ticks up in tough economic times, and they're just going to try to drop it on, extract more money from the citizens and, take their liberties away where they can.
The extortion incentive is always going to be there for government. That's why we need to repeal laws and not create new laws. I was reading that every state in the United States passes between 250 and 500 new laws a year. And, that famously we can already, the famous book, 3 felonies a day, where I don't care if you're a pastor or a criminal commits at least 3 felonies a day that they can be in prison for. We need to start repealing some laws and go back to the Constitution and use some common sense for a change.
That would be...
Granny doesn't need to be in jail.
That's right. Well, tell us what you're working on right now. We talked about it before we officially kicked off, but tell us what you're working on right now. Not the other, but like with Sharon.
I'm working with Peachtree NORML, which is my local NORML franchise here in Georgia, to try to get some of the proper people in politics who are going to make a decision. We've had a decision to, as far as legalization, that essentially our state Senate refuses to bring up. So we're working on that, and then I'm working on other advocacy projects as far as revealing what's going on through books and documentaries and stuff like that with the corruption in the justice system in not just Georgia, but it seems to be something that's systemic throughout rural areas all throughout the United States. Being involved sort of got me to the point where I joined so many organizations to try to find out information. Once you do that, just the thousands and thousands of stories out there of people that are being abused. I mean, occasionally you hit every once in a while you hit one like mine or whatever that starts hitting the news a little bit. And this is the third program I think I've been on at this point. But there's literally hundreds of thousands of people out there that I encourage people in their local community to go find out what's going on in your local jails. See what they're doing and put pressure. Talk to your mayor, talk to your city councilman, talk to your sheriff, and tell them that their policies need to change the way they're approaching people for cannabis, that we don't need students that had a joint being put in jail. We don't need old people that were growing a little medicine for themselves being put in jail. And, so we're going to try to enlighten the entire United States on the process, how wrong it is, and how we're destroying the lives of Americans over a plant.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my frustration, because I want to get more involved locally, but I don't know how I could go to our local sheriff and ever convince him that his drug policies are wrong. I don't think in a million years I could talk this guy into changing his policies. So it's a little frustrating because it's like, well, how can I effect change in my own backyard? And I don't.
If you can't you do what we're doing out here, you replace. Yeah.
Well, the sad thing is nobody around here. Like we had a sheriff's race earlier this year, and there were 3 candidates that ran. They all ran as Republicans, and I don't vote Republican, so I didn't even have an opportunity to vote for who was going to be our next sheriff. And then now, come November, the guy that won the Republican primary is our sheriff.
Yeah, it's the same thing happens out here, and it's not just for sheriff seats; it's for House seats and state Senate seats as well. Where essentially in the winners decided in the primary, and there's nobody.
And nobody even gets if you're not a Republican, you don't even get a voice in that.
Yeah, they're running unopposed. That's the reason I prefer, like this ballot, I'll be voting for multiple Republicans and multiple Democrats. But even though I'm working for Sharon Rayburn, and if anybody knows Sharon, she's been a longtime advocate and activist and was the original founder of the Peachtree NORML, and she's running for as a state representative here in Georgia. And, we're trying to, but even though I wanted to vote for Sharon more than anything in the world, ballot access is so messed up. For me to be able to affect the other races, I had to actually pull the Republican ticket because we had a couple of big U.S. congressional seats and Senate seats that I had to vote on. And so I voted on the Republican ticket. And but in the general election, luckily, I'll be able to vote the way I want. But with the ballot access being so messed up in so many states, we put ourselves in a situation where you cannot vote. You can only essentially vote for a party. You can't vote for the person that you think is best. And it's sad because we lost a lot of people in the state, and just recently in runoffs where they were not quite marijuana advocates, but they were either very sympathetic to the cause or they were closet libertarians.
Yes.
Ticket. And unfortunately, we just had several people on the runoff in the election that just barely lost, or we would have had some more people in Washington that were actually going to try to do the smart thing and repeal it federally.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. The guy that was running in Georgia, and he lost his. He was more kind of like a closet libertarian, I guess, and he lost his runoff against kind of a more,
Matt Gertler, probably.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah,
Matt's a really good guy, and I was really, really ashamed that the people of Georgia didn't put him in there because he had been in the state He'd been a state rep for, I think, 2 terms or 3 terms. Done a fantastic job, but they hit him with really just horrible, despicable, dishonest ads in the last 3 or 4 days all over TV, where he didn't have enough time to be able to get out there and refute what they were saying, and just barely lost, unfortunately.
Well, I guess there's always next time, and hopefully he can overcome it. But yeah, I'll put links to Sharon's campaign in the show notes for today's show. I think I've financially supported Sharon in the campaign, not a whole lot, but I'll pitch in what I can, because I believe that she supports liberty, and I don't care if she's running with a D or an R behind her name. If she's in favor of liberty, I'll try and chip in it where I can, and then I'll also put a link to Peachtree Normal's page in the show notes for today as well.
Fantastic. I thank you so much. I really appreciate any exposure we can get, and there's a lot of stuff we need to fix, and we really appreciate what you're doing trying to inform the people that you can. There's still a lot of people out there that they watch too many episodes of Dragnet and watch too many propaganda films, and still we have too many people that think that we have a devil's lettuce problem, and the more people you can educate, the better off we'll be.
Well, and it's not just the devil's lettuce problem. It's a legal problem, a law enforcement problem, because we've got so many people that think that what they watch on CSI or SVU or whatever, that's what actually happens. No, that's not what actually happens. You wind up with people like yourself and your wife who are, maybe you technically broke the law, but you weren't selling and distributing. And you didn't have arms, you weren't an arms dealer either. So they try to layer on this stuff just to get you to plead guilty. And most people think once you've been arrested, oh, you're guilty. It's not, the whole innocent until proven guilty is gone. There's no more of that, because law enforcement never makes any mistakes, never has bad intentions for what they're doing. They are above reproach, and we need to have a shift of mind on that.
Yeah, well, the propaganda is really crazy. I told you what they did in the papers and stuff like that. Being on all the local channels and 55 different papers. But in my particular situation, part of my conditions of my bond is they put in some loose phrasing, besides not being able to walk in any place that served alcohol, which I don't know what that has to do with anything, and having to be on my property every night from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., preventing me going an hour away from my niece's wedding.
Wow.
Be a participant in this 2-hour ordeal. But besides all that good stuff, they put a little phrase in one of your conditions of your bonding where you can't talk to any witness or any potential witness. They don't give you a witness list. So essentially, if I was to have a conversation with you while my case was on, and somebody that may potentially be a witness in the area, I'm speaking to them through a second party, which is a violation of my bond, which would cause me to come and get picked up. So we have to be really careful, especially in the state of Georgia, about even letting the public know what the truth is, because they'll say that you're essentially reaching out to unidentified witnesses and will violate your bond and take you back to jail. And
wow. So it's essentially a gag order.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they don't call it that.
They don't call it that, but they'll go after you for any little thing to try to, because again, if they can revoke your bond, they can put you in jail. That's all more the motivation to take a plea, and that's really all they're interested in. It makes the local sheriff's department look good, and that district attorney and that prosecutor usually have higher political offices, and all they want to be able to claim is I had a 98.5% conviction rate. Mm-hmm. They care about their conviction rates and their political future. They don't care about the public at all in most cases, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, and the sooner that people wake up and see that, the better. But like you said, we're trying to overcome decades of propaganda and against the plant, and then also that law enforcement is above reproach and never does anything shady or under the table. So it's kind of an uphill battle for sure.
Well, unfortunately, we're in a situation where they've done it to so many people that's the reason marijuana is becoming acceptable. Because, you don't just affect that particular person. This affected and changed the opinion of everybody in my family, my kids, my aunts, my uncles, my mom. I mean, friends, everybody that saw this going on. I mean, a lot of them were almost bootlickers a certain point.
Yep.
And once they saw me go through this, so they may have a short victory by winning a prosecution over somebody. But what they've done is they've alienated all that person's friends and family. And that's why you've seen such a big switch in America, the way they look at cannabis over, especially like the last 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Once it was made legal in California, I mean, the polls are amazing. Even the last national poll that came out, 51% of Republicans are for
oh, wow.
now. So 86% of Democrats. And it's not like the other 40%, the other 49% are against it. Only like 26% are against it, and the remainder doesn't care. So overwhelmingly, it's supported by about 80% of the people in the United States now, and our representatives need to pull their head out and pay attention.
They don't realize this could be a winning issue, and it absolutely could, because the majority of people think that we should have it. So,
well, the big money that they get from pharma, the big money they get from sheriff and police associations,
mm-hmm.
The contributions that they get from police unions, and of course the
private prisons
prison system lines these people's pockets. They essentially pay for a large percentage of their campaigns, and
mm-hmm.
We have to let them know. You need to do what your people want, what your constituents want, not the people that own you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rob, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your story. I am glad that you lived to tell the tale, and that you're on.
I'm glad to be here and not in the Gray Bar Hotel, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Robert.
Thanks.
Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishealsme.com/117. Before you go, I wanted to tell you briefly about a new project I'm working on. I've got a new podcast that I'm going to come out with. Yes, I know. I'm such a loser. I can't even do one podcast, let alone two. But I've just been feeling, especially over the last few months, I just feel like there's so many other things that I should talk about other than just cannabis. But I didn't feel like it was fair to the people that only want to listen to cannabis-related stuff to have to put up with my blathering on about stuff they don't care about. So I'm going to set up a new feed, and the name of the new podcast is going to be Just Add Liberty. And what I'm going to do on that podcast is interview people that have found ways to introduce more freedom into their own lives, whether it's through additional income streams, homeschooling, being active in politics locally, just to host a variety of different topics. And it's based kind of around the theme of Harry Brown's book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. And it seems like our world is getting less and less free. We've got the walls are kind of closing in on us. So what I want to address in this podcast is ways that maybe we can chip away at that wall or push the walls back out a little further. So be looking for that to hit the podcast app that you're using here pretty soon. It's going to be on a separate stream, and it's going to be called Just Add Liberty. If you've got any ideas for guests that could come on the show, I am all ears. As always, I'm all ears for guests to come on this show. If you know somebody who has a medical cannabis story, I would absolutely love to hear it. Have them reach out to me, podcast@cannabishealsme.com. And with that, I'm going to bid you adieu, and we will see you back here next Monday for another cannabis healing story. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good week.